This is the Carlinian Studio, and I am your host, Charles Lathrop, and this is part two of quantum physics and the human mind. And whenever in part one we talked about how the way that you think and the way that you believe actually influences your brain and influences your body, and how in order for your choices to matter, you're not just a glorified meat computer. You're not just a really complicated detector. You're not on the same wave of probability with the rest of the universe. You actually have a role in creating the circumstances that you walk into. And we talked about how, the way that you think affects your body and affects your health, and affects the way that other people perceive you and the way that you perceive the world. How you react to things is extremely important. And we talked about predestination, and we talked about humans having free will or not, and specifically that they need to. We talked about a number of different subjects, and whenever I was closing, I was talking about how salvation that we receive from Jesus is the whole package. It's not just a golden ticket to heaven when you die. It is a completely new way of being. It's a completely new way of thinking. It's a completely new transformation from one kind of creature into a completely different kind of creature. And it alters the destiny of your life. It completely transforms the wave of probability that you're on right down to the quantum level.
Well, I was gonna say, riffing off of the salvation theme, the Jewish word or the Hebrew word shalom means to be made whole, lacking nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're talking about with salvation is to be made whole, which implies that before you were saved, you were not whole. So salvation is the process of becoming whole, which becomes becoming more and more the image of God, which means becoming more and more you, because you were created a unique being.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is, instead of being a gray man or controlled by your feelings, instead of being manipulated by circumstances, you actually come above it.
Mm-hmm. And so this is sort of tying into, becoming more yourself as you approach God. I've found that there's sort of a strange inclination in people to believe that becoming more Christ-like makes you into like a carbon copy of Christ. The thing about becoming more Christ-like is it's not something that you strive to go into. It's something that you receive. You receive the image of Christ. It is something that becomes inborn because you're baptized into his death and resurrection. You count yourself dead to sin and alive to Christ. It's not by effort. It's not by work. And which is a whole other subject. But so fundamentally, Christ said, I come that you may have life and life more abundant. So the thinking into him and the thinking into his way of thinking and being as he is moving into life. And by one man's sin, death entered in. And so there's often this debate. It's like, are humans basically good or basically evil? And it's like, well, it's neither one. Humans are not basically good or basically evil. Humans are basically good with a veneer of evil layered over the top. So it's not enough to say that humans are basically good, because that's not the whole picture. And it's not true that humans are basically evil. Humans are basically good with death entering in over the top. And that's what it is. It is death. It's the ways of thinking that lead into death, which is why negative thinking is literally treated as a physical wound upon the mind. And so whenever you move closer to God, you become more alive. You become more like yourself, because corpses are all the same. Whenever you move away from God and into death, because there's a way that seems right to man, but in the end it leads only to death, you become all the same. They're all the same. They all think the same way. They all speak the same way, because they have bought into a philosophy of death. because the dead are all dead alike. The corpses are all interchangeable. The NPC meme is the zombie meme. They're zombies. They have bought into a philosophy and way of thinking that is death at its core. That's postmodernism, that's communism, that's the core of socialism, is it's a philosophy of godlessness and death. And that's why it forces everyone to become carbon copies of each other. Because they're being transformed into a way of thinking that is fundamentally at its core death. And so whenever you talk about human beings being made in the image of God, it's like the image of God is so completely massive and so huge, you can't fit the entire thing into each individual person. There are billions and billions of humans because it takes all of us together to reflect the image of God. And so each individual human reflects the image of God. Men in individual and unique ways, men and women reflect the image of God in terms of the male half of God's image and the female half of God's image. And then the happily married couple reflect the image of God in terms of like, this is the united image. This is the male and female working together, they're united. And then the family as a whole reflects the image of God in the creation of children and the raising of children, and then the raising up of humans who will then go on to further reflect the image of God in new ways and unique ways that are personal and unique to them. And this is why the postmodernists and the communists hate the family, hate marriage, and hate children. Because children come direct from the Father. They come into the family, and they're supposed to be raised by a man and a woman who are the image of God. And so that image of God reflected to the children teaches them about who God is and about how they're supposed to be. And it helps them grow up into reflecting the image of God in the way that they're supposed to be, and into the way that's unique and special to them. And so all of these people who are transgenderism and homosexuality and all the rest of it, and these people are wounded, right? I don't hate anybody. I'm not trying to say that they're evil, all right? But unfortunately, they have bought into a system and a way of thinking that is, at its root, at its core, death, because they're like, well, we didn't actually want to be human, or I didn't actually want to be male. I didn't actually want to be that, what I am. I want to be this other thing because it's more powerful, it's more fun, or it's more whatever. It's more attractive to me. And whenever you do that, you move away from the image of God that is inborn in you. There's nowhere else to go. It's like whenever I was talking about the laws of logic. It's like you can try to get rid of the laws of logic, but as soon as you try to get rid of them, you find you have to keep them. As soon as you accept postmodernism, you find that the inherent core of postmodernism is inherently self-destructive and inherently implodes on itself. And so with these people who are postmodernists and transgenders and all the rest of it, the NPCs who have bought into the philosophy of death, there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to go. It's just into oblivion. There's no uniqueness. There's no individuality. It's death. They're all in the process of moving towards becoming corpses, which is, very morbid. But that's fundamentally what's happening, and it's happening not just on a spiritual or soul level. It's physically happening because the negative thinking, the proteins in the brain, are literally killing their bodies. Because all the negative thinking is being treated as wounds inside the brain by their own bodies. It's like you can reject being a human, and you can reject being a male or reject being a female. You can reject who and what you were created to be. And that's your choice. But you need to understand that there's nowhere to go. You're not stepping out into anything. There's nothing there. You're stepping into death. You're stepping into death. You're just going to die. You're just going to cease to exist. You're not stepping into a new identity or a new way of being. You're just stepping into non-identity and non-being.
It's like a cat who decides he doesn't want to be a cat anymore. I mean, he can pretend to be a horse and have fun prancing, but he can never be a horse. And in trying to be a horse, he stops being a cat, and therefore he dies.
Yeah, you just stop, and it's I mean, this is it's like you can have fun taking on the mannerisms of a horse, but ultimately, the cat is still a cat, right? And in that sense, it's like it may be harmless, but whenever it comes to human beings and in rejecting the image of God that is inborn into you, all right, that's not harmless. It's gonna it destroys you. It's inherently self-destructive because it's just entering into non-being. It's just entering into non-identity. It's like, this is who I am. It's like, no, it's not who you are. It's a fraud. It's
so
fake.
What you're saying is salvation is finding out who you are, becoming who you were created to be, finding out who you are, becoming that thing, that being. And that being is uniquely created. And you're also saying something about layers. Layers and layers and layers. There's layers and layers of God as well. He gets a new name every time somebody learns something new about him in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And there's layers and layers in him, and we will spend eternity figuring out and understanding all the layers. It's going to be a gigantic exploration and should be thrilling.
Yeah, that is a whole nother topic.
But there's more layers within us than we realize, since we're created in his image. And if you go after a layer that's not built into you, you're rejecting self. And when you reject self, you die.
And whenever you reject self, you die. And in the interim, in between rejecting self and actually physically dying, you become the NPC, the programmable,
miserable,
miserable person that just goes with
the slave who drags his butt to work and drags his butt home and pays his bills.
And there are many different ways that this can manifest, but fundamentally, the people who are not thinking for themselves are people who are, at their core, they're made in the image of God, and they're unique and they're special and they're valuable, and God is working to save them and wants to save them. But you find that over the top of them, there's this layer of the gray people. It's I've been talking about this concept for a long time. It's the gray people. They're all gray, they're all the same, they're all interchangeable, there's no individuality, there's nothing. And fundamentally, that is what the globalists and the satanic cabal have been working to do to the world. To destroy the individual, destroy the marriage, destroy uniqueness and individuality. And to obliterate all distinctions between people and in nationhood and culture and everything else.
That's why they are sending all these people of other races to invade countries and meld up with them.
Yeah, because they
want to obliterate all the identities.
They despise any place where the image of God is reflected. And so, on the individual level, in the genders, in the marriage, and then on the national and cultural level, the image of God is reflected. And so it's not just destroying the marriage. That's not enough for them. And destroying children, that's not enough for them. They want to eradicate any reminiscence of God in the world that they can possibly get their hands on. And one of those pictures of God is the way that each individual nation, in its own individual way, with its own individual culture, reflects the culture and identity of God. And so whenever you take everybody and you mix them all together in one pot, right, you obliterate individuality and you make everyone the same. Everyone speaks the same language and everyone thinks the same way, the way that the Satanists have taught them to think. All right? You completely, you create the Tower of Babel. It's a giant Tower of Babel project, is what it is. and it's fundamentally evil at its core. Right down to the core, it's evil. It's completely evil, all of it. It's the worst.
Okay, I want to go back to the hook in with the observer and quantum physics and how the observer participates in creating. So, if you're going to be an observer that can create good things, you have to have the desire and the training and begin to think along the lines of, as I want to look at things with a good attitude so that I'm a good observer and I can see a good outcome and I can work toward a good outcome.
Okay.
But this starts at the basic. I mean, this is another layered thing.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with the basic one individual trying to get a good attitude, trying to look out on the world as these misadventures or disasters as opportunities instead of chances for misery,
Mm-hmm.
to cities and counties and families and nations all working with that kind of an attitude in mind, because when you have the attitude, how can I see the good in this? How can I make good out of this? Is this good? Where is the good here?
Mm-hmm.
Then you become a participant in creating a universe in which people actually want to live.
Yeah. So
we're
how do
talking
I build
about
on that? That's almost a complete thought.
We're talking about, but see, I want you to see if you can figure out some kind of little angle on, because of the observer. The observer is so critical, just observing it. So it's not just enough to observe it, but you have to have an attitude about it, and you have to have whole layers of background on.
Yeah. And so you often find in changing the way you think to reflect the way that God thinks, that whenever you solve one problem, you realize that problem was actually covering up another problem. It's like in World War II, whenever they were developing the torpedo, okay, there were a lot of different problems with it. Like the warhead wouldn't go off at the right time, or it would go too low. And whenever they would solve one problem, they would find that problem had actually been hiding a completely different one, that they would never have discovered that was a problem until they fixed the first one. And so whenever it comes to, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, this is something that there's this whole entire infrastructure down into the very core of your soul that all has to be repaired one layer at a time. Because the problems that you face, it's like whenever you face a negative circumstance, whenever you face something negative, a trial, a tribulation, horrible things are happening. All right, there's two ways to look at this. It's, oh, I'm going to die. We're all dead. We're all going to die. And this is the attitude that much of the West has taken towards the current situation. And this is often the case with humans. They get into a situation and they're just like, oh, woe is me. And, in certain cases, I can understand why they do that, but it's still the wrong response. Fundamentally, your attitude needs to be one of gratitude. If you are in a position of gratitude to God for everything that He has done, for everything that He's provided for you, and for the tribulations and the trials and the testings, okay, you're going to find that whenever something is going horribly wrong, this is the opportunity for growth and advancement and promotion. This is the point of advancing to the next level. Whenever you hit the big catastrophe, it's like, this is your opportunity. How are you going to respond to it? Are you going to respond to it in giving thanks in all circumstances? Not for all circumstances, but in all circumstances, because this catastrophe is the moment of promotion. This is the time whenever I'm going to say, look, I am grateful for God and for everything that He's done for me, and I'm grateful for this, because I know that's going to be for God's glory, and it's going to be for my good, and it's going to be used for my promotion. And so you find that in order to really deal with a problem, it has to be drawn all the way out. It has to be fully exposed. In order for a flaw to be fixed, it has to be fully exposed, because frequently flaws cover up other flaws. You have to fully expose the flaw and then you get rid of it. So whenever God was bringing the Israelites into the promised land, he was like, well, we're not going to go yet because the evil of the people who are living there has not yet reached its full measure. He only brought them in after the evil had reached its full measure. Whenever Walsingham was trying to nail the Mary Queen of Scots, he went after her too early, twice, and couldn't actually get her. And the third time, he had to wait and wait and play it out and play it out and draw them out and draw them out until they were basically to the point of actually killing Elizabeth I. And then Walsingham nailed them. And so whenever it comes to something like Islam or the migrant crisis that we're facing right now, or whenever it comes to issues that you find in your own life, it's like whenever the problem has hit its fever pitch, whenever it has reached its full measure, that's when you get rid of it. It's like you don't pop the pimple until it's fully gross, because if you go after it early, you just make it worse, or you just prolong it. And so the thing that people don't understand about the situation that we're facing now with the globalists and Islam and all of the mass invasions of the barbarous so-called migrants coming into the West is that, yes, this is the testing point for the West. Yes, this is do or die for the West. But it is also do or die for them. If they lose, it's over. If Islam loses now, that's the end. They're done as a religion forever. They will never recover from losing because they are in a position where they have every possible conceivable advantage you can imagine. And then they lose.
I don't see how
That's
they can.
it.
I don't see how they can win when their culture is so much based on death. The
And-
mutilating of women, the raping of little boys, the beating during certain holidays, beating themselves, the way they butcher animals.
Mhm.
It's all death.
Yeah. And so fundamentally, all right, as has just been pointed out, okay, it's not just that if they lose, that's the end of their religion. It's that it's the nature of it to lose. Because at its core, just like postmodernism, at its core, it is inherently self-destructive because of the way you think. Because humans who are thinking negatively persistently, their bodies literally start to die. It literally starts killing them. The negative thoughts, so the mass of the negative thoughts are formed as proteins in the brain, and the brain treats them, the body treats them as physical wounds. And so whenever it comes to Islam and postmodernism and the globalists and all the rest of it, okay, it's not just that they're going to lose, it's that it's their nature to lose. It is an inborn fact of the way that they think, which is inevitably going to lead to them losing. They have to lose. It's biologically necessary that they not get their way, that they not win, that they not ultimately overcome the West, the Christian West.
The only way that they've gotten as far as they have in Europe now is because Europe decided to lose.
Europe decided to become secular.
Europe decided that white people are awful, we're horrible because we colonize places. Never mind that everybody colonizes everything. All people are doing the same things. All people had slaves. All people colonized. All people were mean to each other. There's not anybody who's singled out for
Everybody wants to rule the world. The Europeans were just better at it.
There's not anybody that can be singled out as especially less rotten than anybody else. But they have in their minds they have decided to commit suicide by their thinking, which then
It has to do with the way you
permits
think.
then permits these people who are death to come in and start doing death on them.
Yeah,
from
and so
outside.
there's been an infiltration. There's been a corruption and infiltration of the West by certain elements that have promoted philosophies and thinking and ways of thinking that have led to death. And so, like, the birth rates are falling, and it's like, oh, you're losing your fertility, and I've seen some of the science that the fertility of the Western people has actually been in decline, and like, well, you're going extinct, and it's like, no. The way that the people think has an influence on their DNA. According to the work of Caroline Leaf and others who are neuroscientists who study this extensively, the way that you think actually affects what parts of your DNA are activated and what parts are not. And so the Nazis that everybody hates, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, all right, they were atheists, they persecuted Christians, they shut down churches, they were socialists.
They killed a bunch of
and
Jews.
they killed 12 million people, all right? They and the communists, the Soviets who came in after them, all right, so corrupted Europe that it became secular and socialist in its blood. All right, they got into the bloodstream and the thoughts of European people and weakened them in a way that made them vulnerable to an outside, even greater evil. And so if you change the way that people think, you're going to change the destiny that they're going towards, because down to the quantum realm, all right, the probabilities are going to change. It's going to fundamentally alter the way that things are going, and it's going to change the people's DNA, and for the better. It's going to change the culture, and it's going to change the politics, and it's going to change everything. And so the only way that the globalists and the Muslims and the rest of them have been able to get as far as they have is by transforming what was strong into death. And they, being a greater death, more dead, come in and start taking over because they've already gone further down the path that the Europeans were tricked and deceived into starting to go down. It's like, why is there this bizarre union, this bizarre alliance between the ultra feminazis and Islam? It's because they're on the same road. They're going the same direction. All right? Their philosophies of death. It's because of the way they think. And fundamentally, if you want to reverse this process, all right, you have to change the way you think. If the people change the way they think, the destiny of the nation will change. If the nation thinks differently, the nation will change. It's not complicated, and it can be done in one generation. It can be done in practically no time at all. A single thought, you have a negative thought, a bitterness, somebody wronged you. You've been holding on to that, all right? And you ruminate on it, and that person did this wrong to me, all right? That thought, 21 days, and it can be broken down. 21 days, and a new thought can be built up. The body is designed, the brain is designed to work that quickly, to be reprogrammed that quickly. That over just a few months, you can completely transform part of the way that you think. And of course you have to go through this process many times because there are many multiple layers of errors that have accumulated over time. But the nations as a whole can be completely redirected from the paths that they've started going down, because the way that people think needs to be healed and corrected.